incredible day today, Laura, and thank you so much for having us on so we can talk about it. Thanks to President Trump and the Trump administration, what he campaigned on, what he actually signed an executive order on, which was that men will not be able to compete in women's sports, was acknowledged by the University of Pennsylvania. We have signed an agreement with them, and we hope that that agreement is going to be a template for other universities who acknowledge that there is no room for men in women's sports, not only during the competition, but also in the locker room and other intimate spaces where these women were required to be with males who changed in front of them. So this is a big deal. The university is apologizing. It is taking away the titles that were incorrectly given to men. It has stated that it will not have anything on its website other than the fact that they are complying, with Title IX. We are just very pleased with the outcome that we had today. It's an utter triumph for President Trump and for the administration, but mostly for the women and girls who will come behind the Riley Gaines and the Paula Scanlons and others. And they've really laid the groundwork for them to be successful. And the star of the hour really is Riley. And I know she's on for you to ask about that.
Now, Riley, you have been a champion on this issue. You received an enormous amount of flack and criticism, some of it really vicious over the years. But you knew you were right, and President Trump and Secretary McMahon helped along the way. Without them, this would not have happened, obviously. Your reaction tonight, historic news from U Penn.
Man, I watched that video back, Laura, that you showed in the intro to this segment, and I cannot even believe that happened. All the while, so many sat idly by and watched and actually reprimanded us as women if we even dared to speak about this. To say that I, of course, am grateful for Secretary McMahon, for President Trump, for even Attorney General Bondi. She's been fantastic at the Department of Justice on this issue is an understatement. I feel vindicated. I feel like pigs are flying. I feel like hell has frozen over. So it is a fantastic day, of course, for sanity, for common sense. But I think more broadly for women, for humanity, for the little girl that I'm growing inside of me right now that I will welcome to the world in just a few weeks. I think of her. I think of her future. That is what Donald Trump and, of course, Secretary McMahon and myself, that is what we are fighting for. So very, very excited about today's news.
That's right. I forgot, Riley, that you're about to have a baby. This is like great news, all around great news. And I love days like this. Secretary McMahon, I mean, this is a victory for common sense. I was a college athlete. I can't imagine having had to compete against biological men in field hockey, softball. As a young girl in high school, it would have been impossible. But there are a lot of young women who really suffered through this. They suffered having to put their championships on hold or their medals on hold, and we're not going to forget them either.
No, definitely not. It's just patently unfair. And when you started by saying, Laura, that it flies in the face of common sense, it absolutely does. I mean, how can these young women be denied their opportunity for scholarships, for medals? And just they have to be able to enter into these sports and to feel safe. I mean, Peyton McNabb got a volleyball smashed against her face, broke her nose.
Oh, God.
And she had brain injury from it. Then we have other athletes, Stephanie Turner, who took a knee instead of competing, in a fencing competition because she didn't want to face a man. And, this is just unfair. I think we've righted a wrong today. And as I said, I certainly hope that this agreement that we have come to with the University of Pennsylvania is going to be a template to show to other universities what needs to happen so that they can get in line and make things right for our women and girls who are going into these sports.
Hi, everyone. This is Scarlett Johnson, Moms for Liberty Unplugged, and I'm joined with attorney and friend of Moms for Liberty and fellow Wisconsinite, Sarah Parshall Perry, to discuss a lot of history has been made since over the last 2 weeks, really, with Supreme Court decisions. And then yesterday was another historic announcement and something that was deeply personal to me as a friend of Riley Gaines and Paula Scanlon. And I've been working with them for the last 3 years and as a mom of 4 daughters. all of whom have at one point participated in female athletics or currently are participating. And that was that the University of Pennsylvania has agreed to right its wrongs, and they are going to restore the records to the rightful winners, the female athletes that won and whose titles and awards were stolen from them, I think, from biological men who were competing against them in all female categories. And not only that, they issued an apology to the women that were impacted when they allowed men to compete as women. So that was historic. And you were there in DC with a lot of our members of Moms for Liberty and CEO Tina Deskovich. So Sarah, I want to hear how you felt when you were there. You're in the room as they made the announcement, but also to discuss further the legal implications and how this will affect other universities and K through 12 schools and their athletic policies.
Yeah, this was a huge day yesterday. Remember, the U Penn debacle goes back years when we all watched Will Thomas parading as Leah Thomas, all, 6'2" or 6'3" of him with this massive wingspan, standing on the podium, divesting Riley Gaines from her position on the podium. Secretary Linda McMahon got up yesterday and didn't just credit these young women for their courage, but also the fact that University of Pennsylvania, I think, finally realized history was not indeed on their side, and that in fact, the Department of Education doesn't just talk the talk, it walks the walk. And it made sure that these individuals were going to be taken care of. It went to University of Pennsylvania. It indicated specifically, you have a choice of losing your federal funding or being sued by the United States government, or you can simply acquiesce. You can enter into what's called a resolution agreement. We used to engage in these all the time. When I was at the Office for Civil Rights at Department of Education, you come to an educational institution and you say, listen, before this gets uglier, before we pull your federal funding or send it to DOJ, you have an option to sign on the dotted line. And they just did not adhere to Title IX. They've also indicated that they will send personal apology letters to every young woman who was in a situation to share spaces and their sports with Will Thomas. This wasn't just a victory. This was a resounding victory. And I think it was so gratifying for me, somebody who started working on the Title IX issue, I guess the better part now of 6 years ago within the administration, to kind of see it come full circle and to realize that everything that we tried to cement then under Trump 45 is ultimately coming to fruition under Trump 47. And I don't care when it gets done. I just care that it gets done. And in that respect, I think yesterday was an encouragement to everybody who's been in this space for so long.
Yes, I 100% agree. And as we've spoken before, these issues were on your radar before they entered like the mainstream consciousness. You saw the inklings, the beginning of what was going to happen when you were in the Trump administration.
Yeah.
And back then, what was it like back then when you tried to, warn everyone what was coming?
Yeah.
Like even conservatives, Republicans, they weren't paying attention. They didn't think this could possibly happen.
I think for my mind, I was in the Department of Education when the Bostock versus Clayton County decision came down. Now, that was specifically related to sex discrimination within employment, and it went to the question of whether or not a homosexual employee and a transgender employee could be fired based on their homosexual or transgender status. Now, I think the court got it wrong. Chief Justice Neil Gorsuch wrote for the majority. Justice Alito, Justice Thomas, Justice Kavanaugh issued excoriating dissents. But we knew, even though this was related to a different statute and a different context with different language, that there was going to be an incoming Democratic administration potentially who would take that plain text of the law of Title IX and say, okay, but the Bostock decision also applies to this. So we were trying to get ahead of the curve because we recognized that for anybody who's sort of a social experimentalist, right? Somebody who's more interested in progressive politics than in leadership or in true fidelity to the plain text of the Constitution and to federal statutory law, they were going to play fast and loose with the text of Title IX, because isn't that the brass ring for progressives? It is the only federal statute we have in our entire canon that specifically addresses prohibitions on sex discrimination only. No other category, no race, gender, ethnicity, national origin, religion. It is only related to sex. It is only 37 words long. And for the Biden administration to capture that and manipulate it, change not just the Department of Education's processes, but also processes at the Department of Education or Department of Agriculture through the school lunch program and through the Department of HHS, which, as we know, went to the Affordable Care Act, its non-discrimination provisions, and capturing so-called gender-affirming care for minors, because you could take that manipulated sex discrimination definition, apply it in the healthcare context, and it was a 2-for-1. The Biden administration got education and they got healthcare and school lunches all at the same time.
Yeah. And what I discovered later is in the Obama administration, the groundwork had been laid. Like you said, there were memos, there were dear colleague letters, there were changes in definitions that we weren't, as parents, I was completely unaware of. And suddenly I feel like there was a Thanos snap and boom. And we're all looking around like, where did this come from? Where did this come from? And it turns out, and a lot of my friends who are school board members said that the language had been already implemented into non-discrimination policies on school boards under the advisory of the U.S. Department of Education, that issued letters to them saying, you should do this. Federal funding could be contingent on this. And then Biden, if I'm wrong, tell me, but Biden solidified that by issuing his the changes in definition in May of 2024. I mean, he started sooner than that, but.
Well, and it really began, if you sort of rewind the clock on human history, this has kind of been, I would say 10 years in the making, because I like to rewind the clock to Obergefell versus Hodges, the same-sex marriage decision from the Supreme Court in 2015. And isn't it interesting that here we are exactly 10 years later, and we needed things like an executive order from the White House on women's sports. And we needed things like a threat of a lawsuit from the Department of Education. And we needed things like new rules and rallies and women standing up to their coaches and their administrators and their educators saying, Title IX is designed to make things equal, and you are distinctly placing biological men above us in the hierarchy of American education protections. It's unconscionable, but every one of the conservatives back in 2015 who said same-sex marriage is first, but it won't be the last, and we're going to continue to see a slippery slope. Every one of us, we were all called alarmist. We were all told that we were being hysterical, that people just wanted to get married. They just wanted insurance benefits. They just wanted to be able to visit their spouses in the hospital and not jump through a bunch of hoops. We were right, because we knew gender identitarianism was the next thing on the horizon. That is because the march of progressivism doesn't stop once it's attained one goal. There is always another goal. That's the entire MO of cultural Marxism, right?
Yes.
Keep going until you can destroy not only all the institutions, not only all the political establishments, not only all the educational establishments, but at the very nature of humanity, the family, and who we are as individuals ourselves. And that is where we see ourselves in this fight with gender identity. It's a losing issue for the Democrats, but they have doubled down. And this, to my mind, is astonishing. When I look at governors like J.B. Pritzker or Governor Gavin Newsom, who are just absolutely refusing to yield, Janet Mills of the state of Maine, who's currently embroiled in litigation with Department of Justice, they are refusing to acknowledge the fact that this is a patently losing issue for the Democrats in power in their state administrations. And I think it's a losing issue when individuals will go to the ballot boxes during midterm elections and when they will go again in elections in 2028.
So that's my next question. What effect what do you think this announcement, coupled with the fact that just last week, Linda McMahon went on Fox and Friends and then issued press releases, the Department of Education, the Office of Civil Rights had said California, the state of California, the California Department of Education, and the governing body that regulates K through 12 or high school sports in California were all found in violation of Title IX, and they were given 10 days to kind of seem similar to what's going on right now with Pennsylvania. Like they would need to issue apologies. They would need to rescind the awards they gave to biological males who won when they competed in all female categories. And then they would restore the rightful titles to the females. And the 10 days are nearly up.
Yeah.
So what do you think that there's going to be action taken against the state of California?
Yeah, I really do. And the reason I do is because we've already seen U Penn, which is an absolute monolith, right? It's not just one of the Ivy League schools, but it is a massive sports franchise. And we've seen them bend the knee automatically. We know Harvard is in negotiation on different civil rights provisions related to the protection of Jewish students on campus. We know Columbia has had its federal funding put into jeopardy. If I'm the state of California and I'm superintendent of public education, I'm going, you know what? They're serious about fighting. They've already revoked, billions of federal funding from different institutions or different states. That, to my mind, is indicative of the fact that if they don't decide that they're going to acquiesce, if they don't negotiate in good faith with Department of Justice or Department of Education, the federal government is going to be coming for them.
Yes, I think they should be very concerned. And California would be made an example of, because like you said, as I was just talking to my friends in Illinois, and what's happening there is not a whole lot different than what is happening in California, in Maine, Oregon, Washington State, Maryland. There are some very deep blue states where they've not adjusted their policies to reflect federal law and the executive orders by the Trump administration. And so I'm hopeful that we'll see a capitulation. If we see a capitulation by the California, that will be huge. That will be huge. Even though Pritzker says he doesn't plan to comply, and that he issued a call for all men to go use the bathroom in female spaces in protest of President Trump. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money to risk. And my experience with public education, they can't lose millions of dollars each. I mean, and that's each district could lose millions of dollars. I think 810 million in total of funding for California, if not more.
Yeah. And you know what? My heart really goes out to a lot of these more conservative areas because, of course, we know that California obviously is a blue state. It's predominantly blue, but there are pockets of Republican control when you're talking about a lot of these particular school districts. Some of these school boards are conservative, whether that's in Northern Virginia or Northern California, for example, who are feeling very much lucked out in the cold because they realize they're facing really a Hobson's choice. They can either lose federal funding because their state governor decides that they're not going to bend the knee, or they can lose federal funding because the Department of Education is not backing down either. So these poor school districts who desperately need this money, because we understand specifically so that even though we talk about billions from the federal government, and it is billions from the federal government to these particular states through the state education agencies, 80% of the federal funding in public education comes from the state level. So they've really got these conservative school boards over a barrel, and my heart goes out to them. It's really going to require decisive action on the Department of Education to be the grown-up in the room and say, you know what? We've tried to approach this nicely. We've tried to negotiate in good faith with you. You're not doing it. We're going to revoke your federal funding, or we're going to send you to the Department of Justice and we'll drag you into federal court. And I think only at that point is the message going to be sent that they are entirely serious about getting this accomplished.
Yes. in Wisconsin, there was a strategy with the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty and other organizations, and Moms for Liberty was involved too, where we were telling school districts to send in their compliance papers. Individual school districts were sending to the Department of Education proof that they were in compliance, not only with the new Title IX, but also they had removed DEI from their policies, that they had defunded it in their school districts, because they don't want to lose funding. And although the state superintendent and our governor, who is a Democrat, kind of dug their heels in and said, no, we will not comply on a statewide level, there weren't many individual districts that have tried to say, listen, we recognize the law and we're trying to follow the law, and we don't want to be punished because of the actions of our state. I don't know how that will play out. But unlike Wisconsin, in Illinois and in California, and I just realized this recently, just like you said, they can lose funding if they don't have the overtly sexual books and the curriculum that is inappropriate in elementary schools and middle school. They could lose funding if they don't allow males to compete in all female categories. So they are stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
And we can only, I sympathize, and I do think that the loss of funding in California could set the tone such that there is relief provided to the other residents of blue states that are feel left out. They're cheering. They love to see all these victories, but they keep wondering when is this going to happen in our state?
Yeah.
Because in our state, there's still the men competing against women. There's still the boys going on field trips and staying in the hotel rooms with the girls and all of that.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And what's so interesting to me is that after the Biden era Title IX rule was finalized, expanding sex to include gender identity, and there are a host of other provisions that made it patently illegal and unconstitutional, everything from due process to compelled speech for preferred pronouns to a multitude of ills that I could wax poetic about, and in fact have many times, but strictly focusing on the sex as gender identity provision. There were 11 federal lawsuits that were dropped within the first 2 months of publication of that final rule. You know what we haven't seen this time around? We've seen one federal lawsuit coming out of California, basically saying that the directive to school districts and to state superintendents of schools that you will follow the text of Title IX as written. We are in the process of rescinding the Biden era rule. You have to be in compliance with this executive order and with our notice of compliance. We saw one, and that was coming from the state of California, and it's been crickets since then, which is interesting to me. And I think it's because they have to know the law is not on their side. Remember, we saw in August of 2024, which seems like a lifetime ago, right? And yet we're only talking, 10, 11 months. The Supreme Court issued what's called a per curiam opinion. It's an unsigned order, and it's generally one that's procedural in nature. And it said specifically in one of the Title IX cases coming out of Tennessee versus Department of Education, and Miguel Cardona, that those plaintiffs were entitled to preliminary injunctive relief. Why? Because they were very likely to succeed in their challenge striking down the rule. People like Pritzker, people like Newsom, people like Mills, every one of them has got to know, if they get into federal court, even if they're in a circuit that is, consistently or historically hostile to conservative legal causes, to textualism, to originalism, they have to know that the law is not on their side. That is my hope, that we can see some clarity from the federal courts. And ultimately, what we have not seen from the Supreme Court yet, that we could see as soon as Thursday of this week, is disposition of 2 remaining cases on the Supreme Court's docket. Remember, thousands of cert petitions are filed every year. Mm-hmm. But what's still remaining are 2 women's sports challenges. One is West Virginia versus PBJ. That's a women's sports fairness law coming out of West Virginia. And the other is Hecox versus Little. That is coming out of the state of Montana. That's another Women's Sports Fairness Act. What will the Supreme Court do with those two cases? Will it pick them up and decide once and for all Title IX means exactly what it says it means, and there is no textualist understanding of gender identity from a statute that's 53 years old that doesn't say anything about gender identity? My hope is that we get some clarity from them this week. If not, that lawsuit the Department of Justice has brought against the state of Maine or over its refusal to keep sports separated by biological sex is ultimately, I believe, destined for the Supreme Court. And that may be when we finally get our final disposition in a very long saga to protect girls.
So there are two important cases pending, and the Supreme Court could pick them up, offer them cert, and so we have until the end of this week or next week to know.
Yes, we've got a couple that are still remaining that haven't been disposed of, right? So all of the cert petitions that come up for the incoming term have to be decided on. They either take them up and rule on them, they take them up, they decide they're going to vacate the underlying ruling and send it back for further consideration, or they dismiss them outright. Well, a couple of those remaining stragglers, and there's a handful, maybe less than 10, 2 of those are specifically related to women's sports challenges. It'll be very interesting to me to see what the Supreme Court is going to do and whether or not it will take them up for the fall or send them back to the lower courts with a directive as to the fact that they need to reconsider what they determined the first time around. So it's anybody's guess.
That's interesting. And so we could expect some more news could be coming out, and it would at least it might give us clarity or at least a hint about what's going to happen next. I really hope that we could have more clarity on this, considering how contentious it is, and that now funding for essential programs in education, it's on the line because states are simply refusing to recognize the primacy, these directives, executive orders, and follow Title IX. And that would certainly be helpful. So I thanks for letting me know about that. That's definitely going to be on my radar now.
Yeah. And it's definitely something to watch. And I think we're going to see more challenges related to gender identity coming out in the fall. The cases regarding, for example, gender so-called affirming care, right? These are not yet done. We saw United States versus Spermetti, but remember there was an associated case specifically not just challenging the constitutionality of the law from an equal protection standpoint, but also challenging the constitutionality of the law from a parental rights standpoint. Do parents have a constitutional right to get experimental life-altering treatments for their minor children? I would say no, and a lot of other scholars have said no as well. In fact, I've written on that precise issue saying that the Supreme Court is unlikely to say you have a constitutional right to maim your child. But we're going to see more cases on gender identity. Thank you, President Biden. Thank you, President Obama. Thank you, Supreme Court in Bostock versus Clayton County. And thank you, Supreme Court in Obergefell versus Hodges. What we're dealing now with is essentially just the shrapnel, the fallout from a long-standing standoff between culture and the judiciary. And I think it's finally come home to roost.
So I was talking with Corey Brewer, who's also attorney here in Wisconsin.
A great friend of mine.
Mom of 4, great, brilliant attorney. And she said something interesting and hopeful, that the attorneys with the will are deeply looking into the fact that now in Mahmoud, if the Supreme Court determined that to read to children and to force them to read as an assignment materials, LGBTQIA plus materials that had themes and blatantly open propaganda that violated those themes, and the messaging violated the deeply held religious values of a family, and that a parent can opt their child out.
Yeah.
And in the Montgomery County School District, opt-outs were refused. They were initially given and then refused when they became, problematic, according to the school district. So if the Supreme Court said that even the materials of a curriculum, if those materials violated a family, a parent's religious values, that the schools had to let the children opt out. Now add secret gender transitions. I mean, if books and materials if parents can opt their kids out of the books and materials, then imagine when you apply that to the secret gender transitions.
Yep.
To the gender transition closets, to the secret name changes, to gender affirming policies, or the plans that they would have for kids. Those would certainly, in my opinion, the court would find that those certainly would violate a parent's rights if the parents do not want the schools to get involved in this gender transitioning.
That's it. That's exactly it. And I have to tell you, Scarlett, lawyers are really going to have to, I think, put their thinking caps on and develop good lawsuits on this front. But now that we have Mahmoud, people have been arguing these gender secrecy cases all throughout the federal circuits. Now, I will say right now, there are two cases that are bound for the Supreme Court. One, we will be submitting, our organization, Defending Education, will be submitting an amicus brief on, called Foote versus Ludlow. It is one of these gender secrecy policy cases coming out of the First Circuit, ironically, the same circuit that Maine is in, and they're embroiled in litigation right now. So we know there's a lot of gender identitarianism in the First Circuit. This is a gender secrecy case. It is going to the Supreme Court on petition for cert. Littlejohn versus Leon County School Board, January Littlejohn's case down in the 11th Circuit is going to be briefed right now on a motion for rehearing en banc. We want to get the full court to weigh in on that particular case, see if we can find a different outcome, and ultimately get this to the Supreme Court. But now we have an extra angle. We don't have to just be limited to arguing on the basis of that substantive due process 14th Amendment parental right to direct your child's education and upbringing. Now we also have an associated First Amendment religious liberty right. And that provides us two avenues to challenge these particular policies, because as you rightly noted, if you can opt your children out of being forced to read everything from Pride Puppy to not, all dresses are pink, or whatever the names of all these sort of doctrinaire curricular names are. Right. If you can opt out based on religious liberty for those particular bases, how much more is it not just a violation of your constitutional parental right under the 14th Amendment, but your right under the First Amendment as well, because it is very clear that lying is, I would say, against the faith traditions of everyone from Jews to Muslims to Orthodox Christians to Pentecostals and evangelicals. You run the gamut, and every one of those parents understands that the interference in that primary God-authored relationship between parent and child should be sacrosanct, right? We should not have anyone interfering in that relationship. But now we know that if we have that religious objection as well, that gives us an extra angle after Mahmoud to be able to argue.
Yes, and I know you have a hard stop. You have another program to be on, but I 100% think that schools cannot socially transition children against a parent's wishes at all. Like, that should not be able to happen. And after Mahmoud, I think now we can point to the logic and the reasoning of that majority decision to say, yeah, I mean, the precedent is there, because social transitioning is a even more overt undermine of parental rights. I mean, it will lead to medicalization. So I think you start with the books and the materials, and then next is the social transitioning, and then next is the medical transition.
Yeah.
And it just seems logical that you could assume from the opinion given by Justice Alito that the court would find that secret social transitioning, teachers keeping secrets, counselors keeping secrets from parents, that certainly would, abridge parental rights. And
yeah, I think that's something that we're going to see more of. And what's so interesting to me is these parental rights cases are not slowing down; they're picking up, because we understand the battle for the fertile soil of American children's minds is something that progressives and unions and politicos have been out for generations. Because if you get them while they're young, you shape them, you change their history, change their narratives, change their gender identities, change their perspectives. You interfere with the fundamental right of a parent to direct not only the education and not only the healthcare generally, but more specifically the religious values, and inculcating what that family believes is right and true and appropriate. And if you have public educators running crosswise at that, it offends the Constitution. And I think finally, we've got at least 6 justices to uphold precisely that notion. And we saw it most recently in the Mahmoud case.
Well, there's a lot of questions answered and a lot more that need to be answered. But thank you for coming on and enlightening. I've learned a lot that I have to digest. And but thank you so much, Sarah. I look forward to talking to you again, because we were going to talk about some of the other Supreme Court decisions, but
another podcast.
Another podcast. So maybe after the 4th of July. I hope you have a great 4th of July with your family, and get to see fireworks, but also relax a little bit. We've all been.
My hope for you as well. These have been busy days, but it's time to relax a little bit.
Relax, enjoy our family, enjoy our friends, celebrate freedom, celebrate our Constitution, celebrate the fact that we have a United States Supreme Court that is that's basically strengthening the Constitution and not tearing it apart.
You got it. Good to talk to you, my friends.
Thanks. Bye, Sarah. That was a great talk with Sarah Parshall Perry. Well, that was a great talk with Sarah Parshall Perry. I learned a lot, and also learned that there's even some more exciting news that will be coming from the Supreme Court, which is great. I wanted to take a moment. I was hoping to go through some of these slides with her, but we'll do that next time. But going through my files, I found some interesting slideshows, and this is a slideshow that is meant for elementary students, and it is one that was part of what we would call professional development for educators and administrators. So you can see this sex assigned at birth. Now, this is an actual slideshow that was presented to teachers in Wisconsin. This slideshow is one that is used all across the country. It was developed by transgender rights activists and advocates. And you can see when a baby is born, a doctor looks at the baby's body anatomy and says they are a boy, male, or a girl, female. Now, this exact language, sex assigned at birth, is used in the Advocates for Youth Comprehensive Sexuality Education curriculum. And that curriculum was what was at issue in Mahmoud v. Taylor. So this is exactly the type of materials that were shown to the students of the Montgomery County School District. So here you can see that gender identity is explained to these young children. this is meant for kids from kindergarten up until middle school. And depending on state standards and basically how woke a school district is, that will determine whether or not materials like this will be presented directly to children. Gender expression. Now, gender expression, clothing, accessories, hairstyles. This is the furry category. And I know that we don't often talk about that because it seems so absurd and insane that it couldn't possibly be true, but it is true. And I can prove that to you in another slideshow presentation. Gender pronouns. Again, now you see that there is this YouTube icon. I'll go back. This is a actual video presentation. I only have the slides. So there is a video presentation that goes along that children would watch, that educators in school districts in Wisconsin and all over the country, they actually do watch. So physical or emotional attraction, who are you attracted to? Why are we having, look at how young these kids are. Why would we have those discussions with kids this young? And that's it. This is and again, this is just the slide portion of a much longer video presentation. So you can see that is an actual presentation that was presented to educators in a Wisconsin school district. The materials were from an activist organization, an activist trans rights organization that developed these materials. They are used in curriculum like Advocates for Youth. And this slideshow is meant to be shown to children from ages 5 up until, it could go up into high school, though this is obviously meant for elementary and middle school students. There are different presentations that have older children. So when you see, and again, when you see that the young kids, why would they present this to high school students? They wouldn't. This is meant for kids in this age range. And from the age range I see here, I would say 7, 8, 9-year-olds. But it is a presentation that could be shown to children as young as 5, 6 years old. It's part of the curriculum. Why would a school have conversations like these with young children without parental consent? That was a question at issue. And when parents were made aware that slideshows, material, curriculum, lessons, school lessons were in English class, mind you, lessons in English class, like this. Let's go back. This. Instead of talking deeply about like what I did, 3rd grade, 4th grade, I'm a Generation Xer. You memorized your prepositions. You constantly worked on sentence structure and using prepositions, pronouns correctly, adjectives, adverbs, all of that. Instead, they're focused on this, on a pretend world in which you can use the pronouns they, them, because you identify as nothing. I'm not a girl, I'm not a boy, I'm a nothing. You can't say it, but essentially you're saying you're nothing. That's just sad and inappropriate. But lessons like this were occurring in Montgomery County, and when parents objected and wanted to opt out, they were not allowed to. Hence, we had Mahmoud v. Taylor and the decision in which the Supreme Court of the United States said that parents do have the fundamental right to opt out of curriculum in which that curriculum violates their deeply held, sincere religious beliefs. So parents' rights matter. I have another PDF presentation that I think that everyone should see. This is an actual presentation that was used in Wisconsin schools. you can see it is creating LGBTQ plus affirming elementary schools. And GSAFE is an organization that basically facilitates in schools rainbow clubs, clubs that used to be called the Gay Straight Alliance clubs, and now they are called the Gender Sexuality Alliance clubs. And these clubs traditionally were in high schools. However, now they are in middle schools and elementary schools. So you can look through, this is a presentation that is made to educators, and there are graphics that are used that would be suggested for educators to use in the classroom. Now, when you think about Mahmoud v. Taylor, this is what you have to know about the curriculum that was used in Montgomery County, Maryland, and understand that this curriculum is used all over the country in classrooms all over the country. So let's look. So here's the question. Elementary is far too early for kids to learn about LGBTQ plus topics. Again, this is the slideshow that is being used by a DEI instructor. This instructor, again, is Brian J. with GSAFE, and GSAFE, it facilitates the Rainbow Clubs. GSAFE also helps to write curriculum to be used in K through 12 schools in Wisconsin, public education. This is an organization that broke off in 2015 from an organization that was focused on LGBTQ rights and providing content for schools. And GSAFE became sort of a Wisconsin-specific version of that. So you can see it's about respect, love, families, right? Unscientific poll. And you're going to look closely, and I don't have my glasses, but you can see ages 2 to 3, ages 3 to 4, ages 4 to 6, ages 5 to 7. And what this is saying is that at ages 2 and 3, kids start to form their gender identity. When they have graphics like this, what they're trying to say is that it's really never too young to start talking about sexual identity, sexual preference, and all of that. Now, that is an unscientific poll, and I think an unscientific opinion. Again, I only have the slides, but this would have been a video presentation. They would click on this story, and the story is about introducing the concept of gender identity and sexual orientation into elementary school classrooms. This right here is the gender snowman. You may have heard of the gender unicorn or genderbread man, but this is the gender snowman. This is a graphic that is in preschools and kindergartens, first grade, second grade, elementary schools all over the country, and the specific one in Wisconsin. In it, they are describing to children, they are telling them about their gender identity, their gender expression, their sexual orientation, and they're saying right here that sex is assigned at birth, meaning sex is not fundamental, it's just assigned and it can be changed. So biological sex isn't permanent, you can change it. That's what they're trying to say. And here, more about gender expression, basically saying that sex, meaning male, female, biological sex, is really all about what you're wearing and your personality. So if you're a boy who likes pink, then you could be a girl. And if you're a girl who likes jeans and you don't like dresses, well, you might be a boy. Again, it is leaning into stereotypes from which we have been trying to abandon for a long time. Now, what does gay mean? Again, this graphic, they talk about intersex, cisgender, transgender, non-binary. What does gay mean? These are all concepts that are going to be discussed in the classroom, in the elementary school classroom, intentionally. Checklist, doing it today, someday. This is encouraging educators to do this, encouraging educators to teach children these concepts, to expose them to gender ideology, and to indoctrinate them very young. Nowhere did you see what would parents think. There are LGBTQ plus students here. So again, all of these symbols are the symbols of an activist organization, not an organization focused on education. It is an activist organization focused on political activism, okay, and political power, not educating kids. It's focused on power. It has all of the materials and resources are meant to drive a child to think a certain way, to tell a child what to think, to form values and to instill those values into kids. This is brainwashing. This is propaganda. What do you say to "that's so gay" and other anti-LGBT comments? Now, this is sort of part of the anti-bullying effort, and all of this curriculum is usually guised under non-discrimination policy and used to fight bullying. And that is why a lot of this curriculum receives federal and state funds. So everything you see here is funded by taxpayers who do not know that this is where their tax dollars are going. For the most part, they don't know. They have no idea. So every time you say boys and girls, again, this is teaching the educators to not say boys and girls, to say friends, because you should not use gendered language. And again, patterns versus rules, gender stereotyping. This is, again, part of the indoctrination process for the educators. Again, he says he has two moms. Another kid says he can't have two moms. Having those discussions with kids in classrooms without first talking with parents and taking the temperature of the families that are engaged in these conversations. And that's exactly what Mahmoud dealt with. Didn't say that you couldn't have those conversations, simply said that before having those conversations, make sure that parents are aware that these conversations are being had and get their expressed consent. Jacob's New Dress. This is a book that is part of the Advocates for Youth curriculum. It's part of several curriculums. It is a book about a boy who wears a dress and identifies as a girl. You can see the graphic. You can see that the art is not very good. When you read this book, I have this book. This book is not a story. It is a social justice pamphlet. It is meant to tell children what to think. They're not telling a story here. They're telling children how to think. They're not leading children to think about things. They are telling kids exactly what to think. They're playing on their emotions. They are using color, they're using these cartoon graphics to, I think, fool adults into believing that this is actually children's content when it really isn't. It's not designed. It is not designed to promote phonetic learning or anything like that. And there are really good reviews of books like these by unbiased educators that explain exactly why this should not be considered literary content that should be used in instruction, in direct instruction in classrooms. This is the kind of material that if a parent would like to read to their child, go ahead, read it to your child, but should not be read in a public school classroom, as the dogmatic messaging behind these books indicates a religious undertone, sometimes a very overt religious overtone that may conflict with the values of other parents. You can see where did this teacher training come from? Where did this, educate? Who is writing this curriculum? Learning for Justice, Rethinking Schools, LGBT History Month, Gender Spectrum. QR code would bring you to a website called Welcoming Schools. You can look that up, Welcoming Schools, and it is all political activism, and you can purchase curriculum there. There are some things that are free, and by free, I mean teachers and educators, counselors, administrators for schools can apply for these resources, and they are basically getting a grant. So nothing is free. Those resources are being paid for with tax dollars and with donations from large activist organizations. So they really want to get these materials into the hands of teachers, and if they can't afford them, they try to find a way to get them to classrooms. Oftentimes, the books that you see there will be given to teachers for free. They'll put them in the classroom, and then they won't include them in the actual curriculum that a parent might request. So, my dad says being trans is wrong. What do you think? These are the kinds of questions that educators are supposed to ask children. And you can see they, them pronouns. Again, the educator is supposed to put on the hat of political activist when in the classroom. This could be used in math. This could be used in language arts, social studies, science, or part of SEL curriculum. This does not have to be part of human growth and development curriculum. And because there are statutory guidelines and limits to what can be taught in human growth and development curriculum without parental consent, often they would rather use these techniques in other fields in the education. They would rather use them in reading, because then you can't opt your kids out of reading. Can you? And now we can see with the Mahmoud decision that if a reading curriculum is going to be guided by activists, then yes, parents can opt out, and schools are going to have to come up with an alternative curriculum. They will have to discuss these topics in an alternative classroom or provide a separate space for the children and the families that do not want their kids to be indoctrinated with gender ideology. So this is what teachers are supposed to tell kids: to correct themselves, to apologize, to move on. This is what teachers are supposed to tell other teachers. If you catch another educator misgendering, then you should confront them. You should ask them to correct themselves. You should ask them to apologize, and then yes, move on, but not if they keep doing it. Here we go. Privacy and confidentiality. This is about keeping secrets from parents. Remember, home isn't always a safe space for students. Work to include families and trust students and in their home life. But if you feel that it's not safe, you can keep a secret. When families aren't supportive yet, they're on a journey. Meet families where they are and help them, guide them towards support. be clear about what the school can and can't do, and work with students to create supports. Anchor adults are critical. Anchor adults are critical. And if the parents aren't the anchor adults, then the educators are encouraged to become the anchored adult, the supportive adult, the affirming adult, the safe adult, implying that parents are not safe. If this isn't blowing your mind, I don't know what will. I don't know what will. Do let the individual guide who is included in the conversations around their gender identity, meaning that children can decide to exclude parents. And this is the end of, I'm kind of speechless after that presentation. That says it all. That is instructional materials for educators. The educators are supposed to use materials like this in their classroom. They are supposed to be guided by these discussions. And this is the kind of training that departments of education are providing to educators. Now, again, the federal Department of Education in the Trump administration, under the guidance of Linda McMahon, Secretary Linda McMahon, now they are no longer providing these materials. However, these are materials that are provided by state departments of education. GSAFE works closely with the Wisconsin Department of Instruction and State Superintendent Jill Underly and provides these materials. They are paid to provide instruction, their professional development for educators, and they also go into schools and they help form rainbow clubs for elementary kids during their lunchtime, during recess, which means parents can it's very possible that a parent will not know that their child is receiving this kind of instruction. They will not know that their child is participating in a rainbow club, an LGBTQ plus affirming club, and they may not know that their child is being socially transitioned. At the very least, their child is being indoctrinated. This should shock you. This should shock you. And this is the type of material that parents have to be aware of in the upcoming school year. And that is why in August at Moms for Liberty, August is going to be the back to school, back to basics month. And we are going to focus on helping our parents, helping all parents to be vigilant and to make sure that in their schools, in the schools their children attend, the focus is on reading, writing, math, science, social studies, art, music, but not indoctrination. Not indoctrination. And we are going to help parents with the most robust opt-outs that we can find and to help them to implement those opt-outs and to feel confident as they speak to their school boards, as they talk to their principals, and as they meet with their superintendents and advocate for sanity and for the health and well-being of their children. That is all for today. We are nearing July 4th, and it's time to focus on our families and celebrate freedom, isn't it? And I'm going to end the way that I always do and remind those who are watching that if they like what they see here and they would like to join Moms for Liberty, please go to momsforliberty.org. If they would like to start a chapter, go to momsforliberty.org. And as always, follow Moms for Liberty on X and all social media platforms by @moms4liberty, @moms4liberty. To learn more about comprehensive sex education, critical race theory, gender ideology, all sorts of topics, go to m4lu.org. We have a plethora of resources there. We have toolkits, we have videos, we have training, we have interviews, everything that you could possibly want, and more is coming. In August, we're going to start to talk about a whole bunch of new topics, expand on some of the old topics that we've covered thoroughly, but there's always something new to be learned. There's always a new court case, something. So go to m4lu.org, and lots of resources there. And also want to say that if you would like to learn more about Title IX, we have Title IX specific resources at momsforliberty.org. momsforliberty.org, specific Title IX resources. There will be more to come. We are working on that right now. By August, we will have new resources to reflect the recent decisions by the Supreme Court and actions taken by the Department of Education and the Trump administration. So thank you for tuning in. Have a wonderful, happy 4th of July, and spend great time with your family, because family is everything. All right. I will talk to you all next week. Bye.